Heather Villela, and I'm a senior trainer here at Letterland. We're very excited that you have decided to use the Grade One Second Edition materials. As an experienced Letterland teacher, you're already familiar with how our program works. However, the second edition features quite a few changes to the instructional design, changes to the content, and changes to just how the materials themselves look. Even our pilot schools will find there is a pretty big difference between the materials they piloted and this final version. Some of that due to the very feedback that they gave us. Ideally, we would love everyone to get to a grade one, second edition full training, the initial training, whether it's in person or virtual. And we will provide information about how you can find those trainings, as well as other resources and tools to help support you as you are getting more familiar with these second edition materials. In the meantime, however, I want to at least share with you the biggest changes, the things that I think will most immediately impact your day-to-day instruction. All right, so with that in mind, if you have your grade one second edition manuals, pause this video and go ahead and get them now. And if you've got something to take notes with, I would get that too. And I'll see you in a sec. As you can see, just from looking at this page, there is quite a bit that has changed from the classic to the second edition, even from the pilot to the second edition. We've updated how the materials themselves look, as well as the instructional design and the content. It can feel a bit disorienting at first, especially if you've been using the classic for a long time. But we really think that the second edition changes help to make the materials more user-friendly. And once you kind of understand how everything is organized and what those changes mean, we think it's going to make teaching with Letterland a lot more easy, or a lot easier, and certainly more effective. So let's take a few minutes to kind of look at what some of those biggest changes are. And probably the single biggest change that you'll notice is the manuals themselves. So if you've been teaching the classic, or if you had some of the pilot materials, you're used to these one big manual where everything was in here: whole group, small group, appendix, assessment information, everything was in one manual. Now there are 4 manuals, and each manual has a specific focus that helps to guide how that manual is organized, although the general organization is going to be very similar to the regular classic manuals in terms of the sequence of where materials are. But everything is streamlined, and the manuals themselves have tabs to help orient you to the different parts of your manual and make it easier to find what you need. And the fact that there are 4 manuals means no manual is big. It means, again, materials and information can be focused and streamlined to make it easier for you to get to what you need to get to. It also means it's a little easier to share teaching materials among a teacher and an assistant or a colleague. And no manual is quite as heavy. Some of the other things that were changed relate to the general materials you would find in your kit. Everything has been updated for the new characters, but also some of the materials like the word cards have just been graphically tweaked in order to make them a little easier to use, a little easier to see, find, better organized. The posters, you have new posters, like you've got syllable type posters and syllable type bookmarks and quick coding steps. And those are to reflect the things that grade one teachers have been asking for, but also some of the tweaks to the sequence and the instructional content. And then the consumables, that's a new piece. So instead of having 3 or 4 different copy masters, you have all the kind of review and consolidation independent practice is now in one set of phonics practice books. And so each student has their own set of practice books. And that includes things like handwriting, decoding, encoding, word structure, syllable rules, all those sorts of things are in there, even some fluency practice. So it's a little more consolidated, and teachers don't have lots of papers and copies that they're having to make, and everything related to kind of that independent practice is in one place. There are new characters. We're not going to really spend a lot of time talking about them here. There is a link that you can see up at the top of the slide that takes you to a place in our website where it talks all about the new characters, gives them their stories, their rationale for the change, and even how to help students coming up from kindergarten with the classic characters make the transition to the new characters if necessary. And honestly, changing characters or updating characters is not a new thing. Letterland does it fairly regularly for a number of reasons. In this new update, it had to do with updating and modernizing the character's environment and their world, as well as making sure that we had more female representation. And most importantly, that the character names provided as clean an example of the sound they represented or supported as possible. There were also a few tweaks to the scope and sequence. Overall, the scope and sequence across kindergarten through second grade has stayed the same because it has always been based or aligned to the 6 syllable types, starting with the simplest and the most common syllable type, closed, and working our way to the most complex and least common, the consonant LE, or the candle syllable as it's called in Letterland. And that is a research-based sequence, and so we didn't want to alter that. But what we did do was kind of tweak and revise the sequence within that broader syllable type structure. And so as you can see on the slide, mostly for first grade, what it meant was adding a few things that we felt that we had missed, but we did also relocate some concepts, move some concepts together, separate others, just some general revision in order to make the sequence more effective. And then the other thing that I would say that's really big is that everything that is beyond the overall or general scope of first grade core instruction has been consolidated in a clearly marked extension section, or section 5, so that teachers understand what's considered grade 1 core instruction versus what would be considered kind of stretch or extension learning. And then also on the early end of that spectrum, kind of unit A has always been a traditional, if students are new to Letterland or if you wanted to do a quick review. But one of the things that we learned from a lot of our teachers was sometimes, some years, some classes, students really needed a more intensive and more comprehensive review of letters and sounds before they moved into grade 1 content. And so this expanded unit A and B alphabet review does precisely that. And when we get to the assessments, we'll talk about how that data helps you sometimes make that decision. So let's actually jump into those all-important teacher guides. So the first one is your whole group guide. And this is the one that you're going to use every day, all day, as the primary tool of your instruction. It is organized essentially the same way as it's always been, with an introduction and then core teaching units and then an appendix. But that introduction is significantly more expanded and more detailed. It's really going to give you a very in-depth understanding of the foundational literacy skills you're teaching in first grade and how Letterland approaches each of that, so that you understand why you're doing what you're doing throughout the year. And then within each section, you have a very precise set of skills that are listed. And then what is the assessment tool or tools that will help you determine whether or not your students have mastered that. And you have one of those for each section so you can gauge their progress across the year. The 5-day unit plan that has been is still, but it is essentially the same. But again, just like with the sequence, we did some tweaking in order to make it better. And probably one of the biggest things was that we added an integrated phonemic awareness and language awareness aspect that would happen at the very first part of every lesson. And so it's more of a phonemic awareness on the early end of the sequence and more of a language and word analysis focus towards the latter part of the sequence. But that becomes an integrated part of daily instruction. Also, within that sound practice that happens every day, there is more of an effort to make sure there is an equal amount of accuracy and automaticity practice, and that we are providing purposeful cumulative review. So every day, students will review and practice those letter sound correspondences, both from kindergarten, but as well as from first grade, first to accuracy, then to automaticity. And then probably one of the things that I'm most excited about are these concept recaps. So wherever you taught in reading for day one and then practice in spelling for day two, you will review for reading on day three and review for spelling on day four. And those recaps or reviews will also involve some guided practice of both decoding and encoding or spelling the concepts, as well as discussing the word structure and the morphology where appropriate of the words that you're going to be building. And then just in general, there was an overhaul or a careful look at all the routines and procedures that were used throughout grade one. And so every routine and procedure got a look and maybe a little bit of a tweak. Some of them almost nothing that you'll notice, others are completely new. And to help support understanding both small and big differences in those routines and procedures is an expanded and very explicit how to teach section. So right before you start unit one, there will be a tab for how to teach, and it has detailed directions on how to do all the routines and procedures for all 5 days of instruction. And there are QR codes that link the directions in that how to teach to more extensive directions and even videos in or on Phonics Online in that tricks and strategy section, which is something we'll talk about just a little bit later as well. Within the lessons themselves, there are some additional features to make teaching the lessons a little more user-friendly for teachers and more explicit and provide more support. There are timings within the lesson so that you can gauge your pace and make sure you're not spending too much or too little time on any one thing. The character fading has always been an important feature of what we expected teachers to do in order to get kids automatic with letters and sounds without that character support. But now it is explicitly built into the lessons when and how we would expect that fading to happen. And as part of that character fading, there is also what we call multilingual learner language support. So wherever language or discussion of concepts or sounds or anything like that may be a factor, you will see these little red boxes with that LS, that means language support. So that could be inside of a lesson that kind of gives some suggestions or ideas. And then there is a more in-depth as a language support section in the appendix that gives even kind of, depending on whether you're focusing more on phonics or more on fluency, what kind of multilingual learner support you can put in place. So inside the lessons too, there is much more explicit directions. So you have those explicit directions in the how to teach. You'll have them in the first time you do a routine or procedure in the lesson, and then they kind of fade to more of a skeleton set of directions after you've done the routine a few times. Also, you have kind of to balance how do you model a lesson and how do you teach a routine or procedure, you have corrective feedback. So you've got general corrective feedback, which is in the appendix. And that's sort of like the how to teach, but it's the how to give feedback part. And so this just good, solid feedback strategies anytime you're working with students in reading or spelling. But then inside the lessons themselves, there is unit or lesson specific feedback so that's tied to probably the most common types of mistakes that someone might make when you are working on that concept or that skill. So you've got both general and specific feedback. And also tied to sort of the feedback idea, you've also got these boxes for spelling tips. So one of the things that we had learned was that the stories were really wonderful, but teachers kind of sometimes wanted to know how that fit with the general conventional language for spelling rules or syllable types or word structure. And then also we just wanted to make sure that wherever possible, if there was a tip or a tool or a trick that we could teach a kid to help them with their spelling, we wanted to make sure that the teacher knew it and the teacher knew to share it with the student. So where our spelling tip boxes, and those are spelling rules or probabilities that you could share with students to help make them more accurate spellers. But there are also teacher information or teacher tips to help also make that connection between that Letterland story and the conventional language. And also just to build general background knowledge about how what you're doing in your unit or your lesson connects to the structure of the English language so that you can feel more knowledgeable and confident about what you're doing in your Letterland lessons. And so that's what you see on the slide here as an example of that kind of teacher info in a syllable type lesson. Inside the lessons and the routines and procedures, first grade focuses primarily on single syllable words, but there are some students who are ready to kind of push themselves. And so you have got challenge words built into your word building activities. And these could be done with the whole class or with a small individual or small groups of students. Your unit stories have all been reviewed and carefully analyzed to make sure that they are as decodable as possible and that there is also cumulative practice of both decodable and high frequency words. There are a number of other user components or user-friendly tools that have been added to this revised edition. One of those is the unit word chart. It's just a central place to see unit by unit all the concept, skills, words, texts, phrases, everything. It's all in one place. So if you need to find words or sentences for extended practice, you have a quick and easy place to find it. Others examples are like the tricky word lists, the Letterland characters and story summaries. So there are a lot of these teacher support tools that have been built into the second edition. So the other manual that you will use on a daily basis is the small group manual. And this is organized almost exactly the same way the whole group manual is, but everything is for small group instruction. But small group instruction is completely aligned to whole group instruction. So there is a 5-day unit plan. There's always been a bit of a 5-day unit plan. And there still is, it's just it too has been tweaked to make sure that students write more often and that they read more decodable text and that there are more options for reviewing and consolidating their learning during independent and partner practice. The goal is that between or among whole group, small group, independent, and partner practice, that students read every day, sometimes multiple times a day, so that we can really build that accurate and fluent reading capacity for students. So the lessons in the small group manual, there are full standard lessons for every day of instruction that are completely aligned to that same day in the whole group manual. But sometimes you need to make adjustments to instruction, whether it's because of time constraint or instructional focus. And so at the beginning of the small group manual, there are differentiation suggestions to help you do that so you can get the most out of that small group time. And just like in the whole group manual, where there is a how to teach to give you explicit and extensive directions on how to do that whole group lesson, the same thing is true for the small group manual. You have a how to teach section that's going to give you those explicit and extensive directions on how to do small group, independent partner, and even homework instruction. And the embedded intervention, which existed in the classic, still exists, and it is still there to provide that intensive support on that grade level instruction. But there have been some changes to that too. There is still a 5-step plan, but now it's a 5-step plan that alternates reading and spelling. So you have a reading day, a spelling day, a reading day, a spelling day. And then we have put in what we call a flex day. And that flex day is there if you're ready to do some progress monitoring or it's time to do one of the embedded intervention assessments. You've got this flexible day that you can put in whenever you need to do that. Or if you want to provide some targeted reteaching or practice of a particular set of skills or concepts, you could use that flex day for that as well. And just like with your core whole group materials, you have got on Phonics Online, you've got a separate section for the embedded intervention and resources and tools to support you, including an intervention word chart, as well as lesson plans. All right. So your second two manuals, or our second two manuals, are a little bit different from the whole group and the small group manual, because these are not organized by unit. These are organized by what it is you need to do. And the first one is the assessment and progress monitoring manual. You won't use this every day, but you will use it regularly. Everything related to assessment and progress monitoring is in this manual in a print version. And everything that you might need to either project or print out is also available on Phonics Online in the assessment folder. There are three major types of assessment. You have core assessments, which every student participates in. And so you have screening assessments that you would give at the beginning of the year to help determine where kids are, how much they have retained from kindergarten, and what kind of needs they might have for small group instruction, and who might need to go in a group together. And then you have those kind of ongoing unit assessments, and then you have some additional skill-based and summative assessments that you give towards the end of the year. And these are all designed to determine students' mastery of the concepts and skills that you are teaching, and to do that on a formative basis so that you can make decisions throughout the year on how to adjust your pacing, scaffolding, and how you might support students in small group. You can make those changes all throughout, as opposed to having to respond to them at the end of the year when it might be too late. The two tools that you'll use the most are your ongoing or your unit assessments. And those really aren't going to look significantly different. You still have a unit spelling check. The biggest difference is you don't have as many items to give. So that really helps, because what we were learning is our little first grade students just didn't have the stamina for some of those really long lists of words to spell, and then the sentences. Your fluency check is essentially the same as well. The biggest difference is we have given explicit guidance into when you might want to shift with one or more students from the student list to the unit stories. And we have included the fluency expectations for both the list and for the stories side by side, so that you can have that data close together, so that you can use it easily or access it more easily. And then tied to that is the data analysis tools that are available through Phonics Online. This is an example of the group record. All of the grade level group records have been pre-slugged with all the assessments that you would be giving, the mastery criteria. And then when you enter your students and you enter their data, it will automatically color code it based on whether or not they have met the mastery or not. And so you can see what percentage of your class is at mastery. You can see which students are struggling with which concepts, whether it's more spelling or reading fluency. And then actually you have an ability, if you click on the student record with each individual student, you get an individual student record that gives you just that student's data history, and it has a place where you can add anecdotal notes or pull in data from other data tools or assessments that you're using, so that you kind of have a big picture of all of that student's literacy data in one place, which is really nice for sharing with parents or bringing to a PLT. The supplementary assessments are designed to be just that. They are for specific or select students who might be struggling and might need a little bit more support. So you have diagnostic tools that you could use at the beginning of the year that would help you fine tune or dig a little deeper on some of those students that you're not exactly sure about, and you're trying to figure out exactly what their needs are, and you just need a little bit more information. So they're designed to be used in conjunction with the screening assessments to help support setting up those small groups. And then the remaining tools are what we call progress monitoring tools. And they're there for you to use in small groups with specific students who need, or you need to track their growth on a specific set of skills, like letter sound correspondence. There's a progress monitoring tool just for that. And there are multiple assessment batteries and charts and tracking forms that you can use to support that. The intervention assessments are there just for those students who are using the embedded intervention. And they are there to support that progress and that mastery. So you have placement assessments to figure out where along the continuum to start with a group of students. You have progress monitoring assessments that are given at specific points throughout the sequence to measure mastery on the skills that were taught in those units. And then you have similar progress monitoring tools to the ones that are used in the supplementary assessments to track specific skills, like we mentioned before, letter sound correspondence. Then you have our final manual, which is the Grade One Tricks and Strategies Manual. And that is exactly what it says it is. It's there to provide you a comprehensive list of all the tricks and strategies that are used either in core instruction or are additional strategies, games, activities, routines, and procedures that you can use in small groups or just in lieu of the traditional strategy, like on those days where a fire drill ruins your instruction or right before a holiday and you want to do something just a little bit different. Everything is organized according to the major aspects of foundational literacy development. And then so you can look at a big category like, say, letter shapes, and then you can go to the more specific skill. So perhaps you're looking for activities that support upper and lowercase, that connection between the two. And you can see that there are two strategies or two activities, matching pairs, and the uppercase trick that would support that you could use. And there is a QR code at the bottom of this screen because everything that's in the print version is also available on Phonics Online. There's a complete alignment and parallel between the two. They're organized exactly the same way. They use all the same language and all the same names. And actually, these are the same QR codes that you'll find in the whole group or the small group manual tied to specific routines and procedures. They'll take you directly to that same routine or procedure on Phonics Online, where you can either print out some support materials, watch a video, an informational video, or even watch a demonstration video. So now our purpose for today was really just to kind of give you some big picture information about the major changes that were going on so that you knew kind of where to start and getting yourself oriented to the second edition. And I would say the single best thing that you can do if you're getting ready to teach Letterland Grade One second edition is get that whole group manual out and really read that detailed introduction and read that how to teach section and really get to know it, get to understand it, and then explore the assessment tools that you're going to use at the beginning of the year. So get your assessment manual out and look at those assessment tools that you're going to need so that you can think about, you know, what do I need to print out for student materials, all those kind of things. So you can kind of get your materials ready for the beginning of the year. So that first part of that whole group manual and the beginning of the year and the assessment manual would be the two big things I would say make sure that you read and get yourself familiar with. But then beyond that, go to our website, go to letterland.com, click on the curriculum button and then hit Grade One, and you'll see this Grade One second edition come up. There are all sorts of wonderful resources, information, sample lessons, teacher support ideas. We have this great leaflet, which is a pretty big leaflet that gives much more detailed information about the changes, the differences, and all the tools, resources, and supports that are in place in this new second edition. And then if your district is not doing training or you want to try to get to a training, absolutely hit the training button and then go look at upcoming sessions, and you can look for Grade One initial virtual training and see what is out there that you might be able to attend to try to get to at least a virtual training, if not a face-to-face one. And then always know that you can reach out and contact us. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to know what's going well, and how we can support you further to make your Letterland instruction more effective, but also more enjoyable. Thank you for spending some time with me today and just hearing a little bit about all the changes. I hope that you have a great year in Letterland, and I hope you really enjoy these second edition materials as much as we do. Thanks, and have a great day.